Those of you who aren't familiar with SRM Perspectives Live, this is an event we do monthly, and it's try how to have conversations with folks from the industry, particularly fintechs and kind of emerging technology solutions. And we're interested in that intersection of traditional finance and emerging technologies. Super excited to have Austin True today. Austin is the executive of AI solutions at Sway AI. Austin and I have had a few conversations in the past, and was real impressed with their product. So we'll have a conversation around AI today. Feel free to put questions that you might have in the chat. If you really want to get on live, we can bring you up and unmute you, or we can wait till the end and certainly ask questions. But feel comfortable to ask whatever questions you want. And yeah, we're going to talk everything AI today and solutions. And Austin, I'm super excited to hear a little bit more about your solution. I know you've got kind of a set that kind of runs the gamut from like generative AI to predictive AI to some analytics around like time series forecasting and I think even regression modeling. So, interested to hear some of those differences because, AI means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And, it just kind of depends where you're coming from. AI has been around for an awful long time. But if if you're talking to someone AI in the fraud area, they might be thinking something very different than AI in the marketing area, right? Or member services or customer services, depending if you're a credit union or a community bank. So with that, I'm Larry Pruss. I'm the host of Perspectives Live, and I'll turn it over to Austin. Maybe we can start a little bit about your background and what got you interested. I think you come from the analytics side of the industry. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your background, the company, the founders, how you guys got started, what kind of verticals you serve, those sorts of things. And I think you've got a few slides you might want to share as well, so feel free to leverage them whenever you want.
Sure. Well, why don't we do that just so I have a backdrop. Let me share my screen real quick. So this is the, who is Sway AI slide. So just to kick it off, who am I? I lead sales for Sway AI. I also lead a customer-facing data science team. So I'm really stuck in with the design, development, deployment, management of AI models, whether it's machine learning models or LLM-powered models. My background is in data technology sales. I was at Tableau for 7 years, for instance. Also did some things in the real-time data space. And I wanted to move from a more established company, Tableau, to get into the startup space just to help build companies. Landed on Sway and have been really happy. And I joined the company because of the strong founders. Honestly, these are founders that were sort of proven entrepreneurs. Our CEO led multiple companies to very successful exits in the telco space. His name's Hassan Ahmed. We have 3 founders, Amir Atai and Jatinder Arora are the others. And Jatinder really brought some of the more deep AI expertise. He led machine learning platform services for Amazon Alexa. But all 3 of them had kind of background in the telco space. And so some of our early customers are in that space, whether it's kind of the operators or the kind of economy around them adjacent. But we've spread out, and financial institutions have definitely been a core focus of ours. And so that's what I'm prepared to present on today.
Excellent. And I think one of the things that when we talked with you guys before that was interesting, and I know you're going to get around that, but there's a lot of questions or some questions around AI and biases and hallucinations and interpretability, and it seems like a lot of those problems are very much being solved by some of the foundational models. But the interpretability piece was one of those ones that kind of remains a little bit of a challenge. And it seems like I remember you guys having a little bit of an answer for that. So I'm also really interested in that And I'm also interested, it almost seems to me like you guys have an architecture solution to some degree where you can kind of plug and play different solutions, whether that's you've got a certain cloud provider, whether that you've got a specific large language model provider you're already leveraging, and that you guys kind of glue those pieces together, but actually provide also some very specific solutions. And I might have totally botched that. But that was when we last talked, I'm like, that kind of felt a little bit what sets you guys apart. I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Yeah, no, you got a lot of that right. So a little bit about Sway is, we're in of course, the data game. We came to market with Gen AI and predictive analytics platform a few years ago, and we support predictive analytics, document intelligence, chatbots, agentic automation. As we worked with clients, we realized that even though we brought a platform that lowered the barrier for entry to, develop and deploy models, a lot of companies still didn't have a lot of bandwidth. And so we actually slightly pivoted to become an AI technology partner with the platform at our foundation and assign a data scientist to each of our clients so that either our data scientist is actually developing the models, or if our clients have users, they're really working with them closely to do that, to advise and enable. And that way, they don't have to be, formally trained AI experts. And so we do have a platform. We focus on it being the best orchestration engine. So we don't focus on building the best, foundational model or anything like that. We incorporate the open source models, the API driven models, whether it's on the machine learning side or the LLM side. And we have different deployment options. So you can sign into our SaaS model, which we host on AWS, or you can deploy on your VPC. So the training and inferencing is all done in your environment. And we do focus on, private models and transparency where we can. And one of the differences is our clients actually own their models. Sometimes the other option is to subscribe to a UI of some sort that's doing things, but that's generally their AI that you're subscribing to. This is different. We're helping you, our clients have their own models, and kind of, that way they're a lot more custom fit.
So Austin, in the past, I did some model development back in the day at Bank of America, and we were doing kind of probabilistic modeling and linear regression and those sorts of things, and trying to predict a certain outcome, whether it be charge off or marketing response or something along those lines. And when I think you were talking earlier about predictive AI, when I think predictive AI, I'm thinking of generally a binary or a probabilistic outcome, kind of almost the traditional modeling, like almost like a fraud or risk modeling. Whereas this kind of generative models, these large language models, these foundational models, are more unique in that they are literally generating something new almost every time. There's some exceptions, right? Because some of these new models are starting to build a memory component, and you can actually reference a correct answer over and over and over again, and it's not going to necessarily give you a different answer every single time. But is there a better description for kind of that predictive versus generative? Because I know you guys have solutions around both of those, right? I just want to make sure that people understand those are two distinct type of use cases, two distinct type of solutions. Is that accurate?
So let me do this. I actually have a slide that I could go into. We're going to skip over some stuff. We can always go back in the flow of the conversation. But I do think it's important to categorize AI, as an organization, as you're exploring, what do we want to do? Where do we want to kind of invest our attention? And, as you look at where the risks are, I think it's important, again, just to understand like the domain that you're operating in. So there's lots of ways to categorize AI, but I think from a business application standpoint, one kind of clean categorization is traditional AI versus new era AI. And, a lot of times people will now say machine learning, and what they mean is traditional AI. And so traditional AI is kind of the pre-LLM era. These are systems that, whether it's structured data, rows and columns, or unstructured data, text, image, audio, video, they can, predict outcomes, they can classify, they can categorize, they can find anomalies, so long as you give them input data and outcomes data. So we call it labels. And the critiques around traditional AI as it relates to risk are really, how explainable are the models, which is, can you trace back the reasoning behind the model's decision? And explainability is really dictated by the types of models used, which is totally controllable, and whether there's embedded bias, and that's controlled by feature selection or data attribute selection that you're using, and then thorough model evaluation, which does need to happen with care. But the reality is that a lot of the most powerful solutions are using relatively basic models, and that are pretty explainable. And it is true that people do now incorporate some of these newer, higher power models. And generally, when you're doing that, you're kind of accepting a trade-off between lower error rate and lower explainability. And so sometimes it's riskier to have lower explainability. Sometimes it's riskier to have lower error rate. But when we're talking about some of these newer models that may be more opaque, again, they're not always required, but they can be used as a tool. And then the other kind of bucket is the new era AI, which is post LLM breakthrough. And these are systems powered by advances in deep learning and large language models trained on massive amounts of data, basically the whole internet and then some. And just as you said, Larry, a big part of what they do is generate, but it's not the only thing that they do. They do a really good job of deterministic operations like document extraction, which is actually a really big area that we're focused with our clients. The chances of hallucination are not nothing. Absolutely, I won't dismiss that, but they are somewhat reduced in the more deterministic operations. And the error rate really depends on how the models are engineered, prompt engineering, the guardrails, things like that. Sometimes you're using things like embeddings and RAG and all of that. And then we also do focus on these safeguards, like having citations and model output, confidence scores and human in the loop validation to score the model and give feedback. I think these are necessary for a lot of use of the LLMs because they are more opaque, or they are very opaque in how they operate. And yeah, that's right. The latest, I think, really exciting advancement is their ability to do reasoning and step-by-step, predictions. And of course, they're not actually doing reasoning. They're doing mimicking of reasoning, pattern matching, cause and effect. They're training on all of the data that's if and then and the math explanations and all of that stuff. So hopefully I answered most of your question there. I'm happy to go deeper on the
You did, and that was a great answer. So you touched a little bit on kind of that interpretability, and I imagine most people on this call understand the reason why that's important, but that's especially important in anything related to lending, right? Because we've got Equal Credit Opportunity Act and other sorts of regulations that require us to make sure that models aren't biased or having disparate impact and those sorts of things. So that's why some of these new generations of models are a little bit trickier if you are using them in that setting. And I've seen, some companies and some institutions kind of look at maybe expanding a population to offer credit to, but not necessarily using those models to reduce that population. So kind of expand the yeses, but not use it to do a no, because they struggle to say, well, what are the three reasons why the model said, no, we're not providing credit?
Yeah, for sure. And so one thing I do want to point out, not to say no one is using large language models for like what you're talking about, which is kind of predictive models on risk. But I'd say that the LLMs, or the way that we use them, is more to augment a machine learning model. And so we'll use like a tree-based model, and on our platform, at least, our users get to see feature importance and also the values themselves that are driving the most importance in the models, and row level explainability. So it'll actually show you the weightings of how the model arrived at its decision. and how we use, and so those are, let's say a classification model. It's, binary if, will an event happen? Yes, no. With the LLMs, the way that we use them are things like, okay, are there text-based information that can be incorporated and kind of become a feature in the model? Or, I'll give you an example with a client that we work with that's not in the financial institution space, but direct overlap. They have a patient attrition problem. They're a big healthcare group with lots of clinics. And so actually, we're layering on large language models on transcripts after the audio is transcribed into text and pulling out call insights, but then taking those insights and putting them into predictive models as features. So we're feature mining with the LLMs, not making the LLMs make the prediction itself. And then when it comes to the explanation of why the model, if you hand over a prediction to, a teller or end user or a loan officer or whatever, they want to have a better explanation of why the model did what it did. And so you can use LLMs to help with that as well.
That's a great explanation. And that like for those folks that might not be intimately familiar with all the various modelings that financial institutions do, the idea of augmenting or doing an overlay, utilizing different types of models is something fairly common, but it's something you might not be able. I mean, you could look at a particular type of model and say, oh, well, these models aren't that useful because they do at times hallucinate or they might have inherent biases and like, oh, well, but that's not necessarily, that doesn't mean the model's not useful. It just means that maybe you use a model along with another model to account for those sorts of things. So that's kind of fascinating for those of us that might not be intimately familiar with the modeling world.
For sure.
All right. Well, yeah. So go ahead and you go back to sharing your slides. I know I took you down a rabbit hole with that, and apologies.
No, it's good. I'll just keep it moving because what's coming up next is just the solution examples. And you already did this, but I encourage anyone who's listening to just ask questions throughout. So I'm not just speaking at you. I guess I do have this slide, which is just an AI adoption timeline for banks and credit unions. They're not the only types of financial institutions, but I was just at a banking and credit union conference. So I'm reusing this slide and I'm going to go over a couple of the use cases. And so just some highlights, a lot of these models are born out of statistical models, right, that have been used for decades. And so, dynamic overdraft limits is an example. I was at an analytics conference, director of data science basically said, yeah, we built this dynamic overdraft limits model, 30 years ago. And so that's when kind of the statistical models were being used in the mid 2000s to 2010. We saw the emergence of machine learning in banks. Fraud detection certainly was one of the first focus use cases. And then we saw the credit unions come into play, in 2010 to 2015. Attrition prediction, still very popular. 2016 to 2020, much more broad adoption of predictive analytics, whether you're doing it internally at an institution or your vendors are helping you do it. Loan default prediction, cross-sell targeting. And then by 2020, really saw a push for automation. And then, of course, as the LLMs came out, really rapid inclusion of adoption of the LLMs. So, and we'll go over some of those use cases as well.
Austin, just so you're aware, I don't think you were sharing the slide. I don't know if you intended to share that slide or not. But a question I had for you, the 2020s when we did start to focus on automation, like there was also a lot of talk about RPA at that time. Do you make a distinction there between RPA as in artificial intelligence? Because I kind of look at it almost like as a simplistic version of AI, because I think AI is all about automating process. A lot of it's about automating processes and things that humans already do. And I always thought RPA was a little like a simple version of AI, or is that not, would you not categorize it that way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not I mean, RPA is much more like I'm going to give a very directed action, like take this thing and put it there,
Yep.
which is certainly automation. With the AI, you can give it kind of wider instructions. I'm going to upload this packet of documents with parent-child relationships that may be confusing, and I need you to go read them and find the surviving attributes, and verify rent payments or something, make sure they match. So it's telling the system to do a task with guidance on what that task needs to be versus kind of really hard blueprints on how to operate. That's the way I think about it.
And you mentioned earlier one of the latest kind of new things is reasoning. And I think I mentioned earlier before we were talking, before we I think even kicked this off, that some of the models now have memory as well. And ultimately this, at least the expectation is that this is going to lead into kind of agentic models. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what that reasoning component is, what memory is, and what is agentic in your from your standpoint.
Sure. So, and I probably should have brought on one of my data scientists to really get into the weeds here, but when I think about agentic, it's really just multi-step, automation. And
Yep.
then, of course, you get into the topic of, sort of these, agent sort of managers that have agents underneath them that are task agents, right? And so you're kind of giving instruction, and you're now giving more freedom to the AI to figure out what to do based on what it sees. And so, but most of what we're doing today is not getting to that level. Honestly, I don't know that we're seeing a lot of companies quite ready for that. It's more about just like multi-step automation. And so as far as the models themselves, they are able to do this step-by-step prediction, and they're able to, just at a foundational level, they're already trained on all of this data, and they can uncover, they can make a decision now in this stepwise fashion, but you can augment that by bringing external data to the models, of course. And so that's where you create embeddings. And so embeddings are essentially, the ability to create meaning out of external data that you bring in, and through the embeddings, it turns the text into numbers. And then the models use RAG, and RAG essentially is the ability to reference these external docs and have that reference as it makes the decision, and not just make the decision on the foundational data.
And RAG is retrieval augmented generation, right?
Yes. Yep.
I always try to throw that out there at parties to impress people.
Yeah. Does it work?
As long as they don't ask me to go further on it.
Yeah. Then you need to phone a friend.
Yeah, exactly.
So you said you couldn't see my slides?
Wasn't able to see your slides earlier. I was able to see your slides. I think you were talking about some of the history of kind of model progression, and that we weren't able to see the slides.
Okay, let me start sharing again.
Yep.
Okay.
I think it's, yeah, now we can see the screen.
Can you see them now?
We can.
Okay. So how many minutes do we have left?
About half an hour.
Okay.
We should be good.
So I am working my way to solution examples. I wanted to say a few things around kind of risk, AI risk, because I think in the financial space, there's a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out what is our risk tolerance. And it can be somewhat scary. Sometimes I see speakers that they reach for the most sensationalistic topics in AI, and it actually scares everybody.
Yeah.
And the reality is that, a lot of the models that are in use today have been around for decades. And, sometimes the model underneath gets upgraded because the technology improves, but not always. And there are a lot of tried and true solutions, and they're all, very quickly, the technology providers and whoever's building these models are building in safeguards as well. And so everyone's focused on, not, you know, acting on false information. That is to say, it'd be too much to dismiss the risk. There certainly is risk. But one of my points is that conservatism and risk aversion are not synonyms. So I'll share an anecdote. I was at an analytics conference recently, and I was speaking to this VP of analytics, and she basically said, "Hey, I'm at this credit union, and I'm a little bit frustrated. My SLT is pretty weary of AI, and they haven't said it, but they essentially have an informal no AI policy." And she later confided in me that she would probably have to go find a new credit union.
Yeah.
And my point there is, your best people are going to want to use the best tools to drive the most impact, right? And if you want to retain good people and stay competitive that way, you've got to think about that. And AI is quickly, getting integrated in all kinds of solutions, anyways. And so it's coming at you, and your teams are going to want to use it.
Austin, to that point, I was having a conversation with a credit union the other day, and they were saying they've got an AI policy and they've got processes in place to kind of lock it down so that they can only use one tool, the at work tool. And I said, these AIs now have vision capabilities where if I've got an AI on my phone, Meta or any others for that matter, you can take a picture with your phone of the screen, your computer screen, and they've got the same information that's on your computer now. They can just see those characters. And so I think what's more important, I truly feel the biggest risk is not doing anything, but I think more important than having an AI policy and scaring your employees about it is making sure they understand the context of what these models are, what data you can use them, what data you don't want to use in them, like what kind of data is off the table, like PII, you don't want to be putting that in, but like a lot of other things are really useful. So, because it's a truly disruptive technology. And when I always say disruptive technologies, it's a disruptive technology when you set out a policy and people work their ways around it because it's useful as a tool. And I think that's a great point you make.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, like we take data privacy and explainability and all of those things very, very seriously, and they should be taken seriously.
Agreed.
I guess I'm, making the point that, conservatism and AI risk aversion are not identical, and that it's important to actually take ownership of, being responsible with it and using it, right? Not, just completely blocking it out is not entirely productive. And so, another point of view is just weighing the risk versus opportunity with your customers or your members in mind. Again, this is framed as members right now because I just got, presenting at this credit union conference, but, consider, a member who's a victim of a fraud event because there weren't sophisticated protections in place. Consider, a member that waited 5 times as long as they needed to and received the wrong answer to a complex question because the frontline staff was hunting and pecking through policies and procedures instead of using a knowledge-based chatbot, or they fell into debt that could have been prevented in part by predictive guardrails and early warning systems. So who's at risk here, right? The member is at risk because the protections aren't in place or the systems aren't in place. And so, in any case, just something to think about as you think through some of these solutions. All right, so I wanted to get into some solution examples. I've bucketed them in the AI application types. We've got predictive analytics to start. And so this is where, of course, you're connecting to data, uploading data, you're identifying things, you're classifying, you're predicting, or you're simulating. And you can do this to kick off automation campaigns and power dashboards and export to Excel and power production systems. So what I wanted to start with was a use case around dynamic overdraft limits. So for context, if I'm a bank or a credit union and I have deposit holders, I'm going to let a lot of those deposit holders go into the negative, so that they have free-flowing transactions to a point, and I might charge a fee for that or not. There's pressure from regulators to not charge that fee right now. But at some point, I'm going to stop them, because I don't want them to go further into debt, and they may eventually just charge off and not pay. And we're going into a time where charge-offs are from overdrafts and from loans, but certainly from overdrafts as well, are going up. And so many banks and credit unions still have a uniform limit across all of their customers or members. So they're like, oh, we'll let everyone charge or overdraft to $500 before we decline the next transaction. And so what dynamic overdraft limits do is it assigns a limit depending on a personalized risk profile for that account holder. And so the model defines this limit. And sometimes this is an upgrade from a uniform limit. Sometimes credit unions or banks have multiple limits, but they've incorporated some statistics or like kind of static formula to define it. And the way it can also improve revenue optimization is sometimes you have this uniform limit, but actually that's curbing free-flowing transactions for people that do not have a higher risk and are able to repay. So one of our clients is Credit Union One Nevada. And I'll just give a call out to Steve O'Donnell. He's the COO there. We worked with him as we built this model. And they did have rising charge-offs. They also had an issue with bust-out fraud, which is basically, account holders, fraudsters, developing a transaction pattern. And then, they may have taken a reward on that account as well that they collected on, and then they eventually charge off and walk away on purpose. And so essentially with Steve and his team, we developed a model. And we did a phased rollout. And one of the things that he and his team wanted to see was, do people care that their limits are changing? Is there commotion? Because they were uploading this data, of course, into their core, but also their digital banking so that it's transparent and people knew what the limits were. Turns out no one said anything. But it enabled an 8x reduction in charge-off exposure. So the way that the model works is it assigns the limit based on someone's ability to repay through a simulation. It simulates pushing everyone into an overdraft status and then predicts at what level they will be able to recover with a certain confidence threshold. And so it doesn't change the limits for every account holder every time. And we're doing monthly cycles, but you could do weekly. It actually only changes the limits 25% of the time. And it does so with relative balance across the tightening and loosening the limits. But when it does tighten, when it recommends tightening, it recommends tightening 96% of the time for accounts that ended up charging off. So it knows when to tighten to prevent the charge-off exposure. And so for the One Nevada team, they take this output file, as I mentioned, and they put it into their production systems on a cadence. I really, really like this model because it's a great example of automation. And it's certainly not taking anyone's job, right? No one's sitting there at their keyboard changing people's limits. It's just immediate charge-off reduction. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So I'll keep going, and Larry, just speed me up if I'm going too slow because I'm about
Nope,
to.
it's just you're good.
Okay. So, when we speak with banks and credit unions, one of the first things that they say they're focused on is increasing deposits or increasing loans, right? So growth is always important. But the reality is, in order to grow, you must plug the leaky bucket. And the industry averages for attrition is about 12%, at least across the credit union space. It's a little bit higher for banks, actually, and 25% for first-year attrition. So I'm talking about overall customer or member attrition, which is when they actually close their last account. But there are other forms of attrition. There's account level attrition. So if you are a bank or credit union and you put out some attractive rates or some rewards to get some more account holders, they might be a little bit flighty after a while because they're looking for the next rate, right? And so it may be good to put in some protections around account level attrition. And then there's silent attrition, which is, this is kind of the gradual disengagement of members or customers from their banking services without formally ending the relationship. And this does increase the likelihood of overall attrition by 60 to 80%, but it doesn't always happen right away, or sometimes it doesn't happen. They just maintain, their account or accounts, but they just have less assets. And in this case, the problem is their customer lifetime value is lower, and they also don't click on new offers and buy new products. So their propensity to do the next loan or open the next account is diminished. So for this model, how it works is, well, first of all, there is some necessary analysis to be done, which is identify the threshold at which members or customers' balance falls and regularly does not recover. So an example would be it falls to 25% of the 6-month median balance amount. And then the model predicts which members will enter this slide within the next 2 months. So if you think about if you're just doing an attrition model and not a silent attrition model, that can be really helpful too. But it's going to be a lot easier for a model to figure out whether someone's going to attrit lower in the slide. It's harder to figure that out higher up, but there's a lot more value if you can kind of curb it before they enter that slide. And once you predict this, you can, share these insights with, employees to drive human-directed action, but you can also incorporate them into automation campaigns, whether it's through email or SMS or text, et cetera. And so this does have a really big impact on retention odds and re-engagement, as you can see. And we already talked about the LLM feature mining, but I want to just do a callback to that. Once you have this model in place, you can add new layers, and that's one of them, is start kind of, because this model is oftentimes built off of, customer member data, transactions data, deposit, loan data, et cetera. And then you can add things like call center data or anything else that you have. So,
Austin, one of the things I know when back in the day when I did model development, seemed we spent as much, if not even more time prepping the data than building the model. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that. 'Cause, like what kind of work is done prior to the model with getting the data in order? Like, what are some of the important things a credit union bank should be thinking about? Do they need a data lake? Does it all need to be in one spot? How do you go through that process of cleaning it up? I think you might have some tools that you can utilize for kind of structuring or cleaning data. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, data engineering is like incredibly important for all of this. We do have a platform that automatically profiles data. So it runs tests. It'll score your data by completeness, uniqueness, validity, consistency. It'll tell you immediately whether you have duplicate rows or missing values or high cardinality or any of this stuff. So it actually tells you where you should go focus to clean your data, and then makes it much easier to clean the data. And so, but yeah, I mean, as far as an institution who maybe doesn't have all their data clean yet, and is trying to figure out, okay, where should we focus our attention? My recommendation is to figure out what you want to do. So if you want to grow deposits, you want to prevent churn, and build a pipeline for that thing, excuse me, and then, learn about what is required from a data organization standpoint, and then move that further back in the stack. And, when I was at Tableau, it was consistently, we would talk to people before they had done a data warehouse project, and they just wanted the insights. And some groups would say, okay, well, I think we need to actually go build a data warehouse. And they'd think it would take 6 months and it would take 3 years, maybe. So I would just caution that you need to have some quick wins, and actually going through building models and dashboards and things like that help you understand like where you do need to organize the data. And there will be some iteration, there will be some duplication of work because you just went straight to, a model pipeline in this instance, and then you had to go kind of back and clean it up. But I think it actually overall helps you move a lot faster. There are also, groups that you can work with that, for instance, in the credit union space that will help you move faster. I'm at the Architecture Summit. We work closely with Architecture. They're a great group. They're not the only group, but they're certainly one of the great ones. And so, yeah, that would be my recommendation: is go do something, derive value, let the return fund the work that you're going to do on the data warehouse or the next model or what have you.
That's a great suggestion. And again, from a client standpoint, they can have their source on any cloud provider, right? You can ingest data from anywhere, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
That's right.
cool.
So I'll just keep going. So the next AI application type is document processing. Certainly, it can do more than complex document processing, but AI definitely makes it possible to do complex document processing. And so this is where you're uploading or connecting to data, unstructured data, and then we use large language models to do things like extractions out of the data, answer long questionnaires, do summaries, and then offer citations, etc. And then our platform has this human in the loop validation step, so that you can give feedback to the model. You see the confidence on the output, you see the citations, etc. And we do think that's really important, that SMEs get an opportunity to see what the model's doing and check it. And then you can then use this data to append to Excel spreadsheets, or kick out to databases, or other production environments. And so there are lots and lots of use cases. I'm going to go over one use case, um, but happy to speak to others. Whoops. So we work direct with institutions. We also help power software platforms. So Rochdale is in the risk management space. They've been working with credit unions and banks for over 20 years. They started as a consultancy, and they have this platform called Apogee IQ. And they have multiple modules, but one of them is in vendor due diligence. And so they used to put the burden on users and vendors and their services staff, to basically take these packets of documents when someone signs a vendor or annual, there's a review that's done. So the contracts, the SOC 2 reports, the insurance policies, the disaster recovery policies. They used to put the burden on humans essentially to go read that stuff, pull out the important information, and answer long questionnaires and do sectional summaries and global summaries. Now the AI does that. But embedded into their platform, they get to use the human in the loop validations to make sure that the AI did the right thing. And so they're using our platform by way of REST API integrations, and they have the platform deployed in their VPC. So everything's private, but obviously not everyone needs the API integration. So they're a really strong partner of ours. And so, yeah.
Yeah, Rochdale is a SRM partner as well, so we're familiar with them.
Yeah, they're a great group.
Yep.
But there's lots of document tasks, right? Think of anything where human beings are doing manual document tasks of reading documents, taking one thing and putting it somewhere else. And again, the really complex use cases are usually have to do with not just one document, but a packet of documents, and you need to understand the surviving terms or the hidden risks, et cetera.
And this is one of those areas where large language models really excel.
They do an incredible job.
Yep.
Yeah, incredible job. And so the next AI application type are AI chatbots, powered by foundational data plus enrichment data from the company. And then, of course, you can define guardrails based on what you or your company want to do with the chatbot, and empower users to ask free-form questions on specific documents or global set of documents or unstructured data. and get citations and references.
Austin, are you guys doing anything with voice models yet, or just the chat function? Are you keeping it in text, or are you starting to use audio as well?
The only things that we do around audio are the call center stuff where it's not inferenced in real time. We'd love to get there. But right now it's, if calls have already been made, we'll layer AI on that. But the latency is normally, there's a pipeline for that, right? So the latency is normally a few hours, at least to get it from your system to our system, inferencing back to your system.
Okay.
So yeah.
Makes sense.
So knowledge-based chatbots, are coming into play very quickly. Think about, you've got frontline people like tellers, or loan officers, or people at the retail branch. You've also got back office people that have questions. They're spending upwards of 45 plus minutes a day looking for things, policies, procedures, etc. And this becomes even more pronounced when you're onboarding a new hire. If you believe Kuna, they believe that it takes 60 to 90 days to onboard somebody and 120 to be fully ramped. And so that's an expensive amount of time where someone's taking longer to do their jobs, or maybe making mistakes or what have you. And so the impact of these models is giving people time back. And so whether that's 25 minutes per day per employee, or saving 12 to 36 days in the onboarding process, it gives people time back. And it also helps allow people to spend more time on other higher value things, like building relationships with people and doing referrals and cross-sell promotion, et cetera. And so there's evidence to show that these tools help increase that referral rate pretty in a pronounced way.
I saw some stats somewhere that said that for people who are using kind of just in their everyday work without a very specific application, but kind of broad use of large language models, that just by being more efficient communicators and using it kind of as most people would, that they're finding they're getting 2+ hours a week back on their jobs. And if you take that and you multiply it by, 100 employees, that's a really large amount of time that can be put towards other sorts of projects. So it's hard to overestimate the impact of this.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think, but of course, what people are leaning on are tools that are maybe not as secure as they need to be. And so, a big part of what we do is we help that security, and we help kind of with the enrichment of, using your own data in a secure way to ask questions and what have you. So, yeah, absolutely. So another form of this using chatbots is in the wealth advisory space. So we actually have a client that's a software platform in the wealth advisory space. And the opportunity cost to not convert someone who's a client is 135,000 to 540,000 as an average. That's basically the mean and median values of like how much the lifetime value of a client is. And so when you're dealing with a prospect, the abandonment rate is really high due to the fact that you have to get lots of documents, and that's cumbersome for your prospect. So, give me, whatever's in your E-Trade and your Charles Schwab or whatever, we got to collect that. We're going to do asset classifications, and I'm going to turn around, some analysis and ask you lots of questions around, your risk tolerance and your goals and all this stuff. So a lot of this stuff is done in a fragmented way. And there's PDF intake forms that people need to fill out and the whole thing. And so it's a lot of work. And so the way this is transformed is using an AI chatbot to basically guide someone through the process. Here's your checklist. Here's the documents we're going to go through. Please upload this one. Oh, looks like this was missing XYZ. Can you fill this in? Do you have any questions? And then the ability to answer those questions. This doesn't replace the human interaction. These advisors are still, able to meet with their clients or prospective clients and go through those questions again, but this time in a deeper way, right? Now that they have some of the surface level, answers in place, and they can move faster and have kind of that, again, that deeper level relationship based conversation. And so, yeah, we're really excited about this use case. So that's what I had prepared for use cases. I could keep going. I don't know if you have any specific questions, Larry, about
I
use cases,
I'd
but
more question or a comment on the wealth management around onboarding. So I imagine it saves time for the advisor because they don't have to be doing that, but also it likely reduces the amount of time that someone has to spend uploading that stuff or answering questions. Like if an advisor is not available 24/7, but a chat bot is available 24/7. So, if I've got a question for my advisor, I got to call him or her on my time, schedule a time to talk to them. Okay, yeah, I get my question answered. And then, 15 minutes later, oh, geez, I got another question. I need to reach out to them again. Like that process just exasperates or elongates that onboarding, right? So either they're not onboarded or it takes a much longer time where, boy, if you can get that client onboarded faster and those assets moved over, like it's just a win for everyone involved.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, it speeds up the advisor's time. They're spending a lot of time just taking data, putting it into their Excel sheet, looking up the asset classification, the whole thing. But the really big reason why organizations are moving on these kinds of things is because it lowers the abandonment rate for the clients themselves, and that's really where the big money comes in.
That makes sense. Can you just from again, because I remember looking at your website and the things, I just thought it was really interesting how it just felt like plug and play with the current tool sets that a bank or a credit union might have, right? Because again, I just talked to a credit union the other day and they've got probably half a dozen what we consider AI solutions, right? It's not one particular vendor, it's different vendors for different needs. And so, like, I was thinking about what you were saying, and I'm trying to remember the term you had used. I had written it down. Um, it was like an outline. It was an outline. What was the term you used? Um, well, I'll call it an outline for now. That wasn't it, but like kind of a framework. And you had mentioned before, you could use any large language model that a bank or credit union could have as the driver for that foundational model. Any data source, right? It doesn't matter who their cloud provider is. You guys could interact with that. You've got various data connections, right? So you've got APIs that are built. You've got interfaces to the Databricks, the Teams, the Google's SQL server. So you can ingest that data from anywhere. I think we may or may not have talked about this visual data preparation. I think we did talk a little bit about some of the cleansing and organizing of data. And then you do have, and you talked about earlier, this kind of state of the art models that are forecasting models. So that more the predictive stuff. So it's like you've got a lot of different components that you can kind of plug and play for a solution that matches a credit union or community bank's business needs. So it's not one size fits all. It's really what is the business trying to solve for, and here's a solution to get you there. Is that reasonably accurate?
Absolutely. So, from a technology standpoint, as I mentioned before, we focus on having the best orchestration engine. So,
Orchestration. That was what I was looking for. Well, thank you.
yeah, we do the work of going and finding the models, managing the model libraries, and obviously kind of the tooling, building the tooling to be able to work with these models. But we have at this point sort of a library of pre-built use cases. And not everything is completely plug and play because every organization has different data, but we have a system that can kind of mold to that quite easily. And so, not to say it doesn't require any work. There is work involved, and that's why we have our platform to move fast. So, yeah, I'd say, it's for these credit unions and banks, one of the challenges is they want to take advantage of AI, but they need to move fast and they need to show return very quickly. And so that's really what we're focused on is, getting them, a model of value quickly and then being able to build from there as needed. And so, yeah, it's been a lot of fun working with those groups.
So I've got probably one more question around and I was talking with an ex-colleague and he does model validation for really big financial institutions, JP Morgan's of the world and Bank of America's. And I know there's large financial institutions and probably smaller ones as well, but you are required for some types of models to do validation and make sure the model hasn't shifted, scoring and those sorts of things.
Sure.
Do you do any of that kind of work, or is that something that okay, so you do
Yes.
as well?
Yeah, that's baked into our technology. And so model evaluation is a really key piece of that. And that doesn't just happen once. That needs to be done, as the model goes live. And then, you're managing that, making sure it doesn't drift and things like that. So that's really important. And it's different types of evaluation for different types of models, of
Right.
course. So yeah. And I would say learning all that is one of the biggest barriers of entry for most folks that aren't professionally trained. What are these error rates? The error rates, or their metrics rather, for a classification model is different than a time series model, and different for some other model. So that's where we train people and kind of continue to do the enablement.
So Austin, as we wrap up, and we'll give people an opportunity to ask questions, but if people want to get a hold of you or Sway, I know this, is it okay if I drop your email in the chat?
Please do. Yes, of course. I've probably got it on my slide.
Okay. So it's austin.true@sway-ai.com, right?
Austin.true at sway-ai.com. That's right. So I'll just put it on the screen, make things a little easier.
Awesome.
But yeah,
Perfect.
shoot me an email, shoot me a text. Feel free to look at the website. We'd love to chat.
Awesome. Well, this has been really great. So let's see if anyone's got any questions. Feel free to put it in the chat, or if anyone wants to be unmuted, we're happy to do that as well. And then, of course, we'll have a recording of this probably be available early next week for folks, for anyone that might have missed it. No, I don't see any questions, so that's often a sign that you did a very good job explaining it. I really enjoyed the conversation, Austin, as I have our previous ones, but this was great to do it in a more public forum, and I wish you guys a lot of success. Seems like you have a great solution there.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Larry, for having me. And I'd love to, if people have questions after, love to answer them. We're also not a, too salesy a bunch. We really like to just have conversations and learn from people and what are they doing? What are the, where's the pain? And so, yeah, I'd love to have that kind of conversation as well.
Sounds good. Well, again, thank you very much. Truly appreciate it, and hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much.
Take care.